Have you ever knelt in prayer, whispered your deepest hopes, and felt nothing? The silence after Amen can feel heavier than the words themselves. Many believers have been there waiting for an answer that never seems to come, wondering if perhaps their faith is not strong enough, or if God simply is not listening. But what if the problem is not faith at all? What if we have misunderstood how prayer is truly meant to work? Prayer is not a wish list sent to heaven. It is not a ritual to calm our conscience or a formula to get what we want. Prayer is a living, breathing connection, a dialogue, not a monologue. Yet too often, we turn it into something mechanical. The same words, the same posture, the same expectations. When we pray like that, we may end up speaking at God, not with Him. In this video, we are going to uncover what Jesus really taught about prayer, how to speak to God in a way that awakens the soul, not just fills the silence. Because when Jesus spoke about prayer, He did not give people a magic chant or a secret method. He gave them something much more powerful: understanding. He showed that prayer is not about changing God's mind. It is about transforming the heart of the one who prays. So if you have ever felt frustrated, unheard, or disconnected during your prayers, stay with us. You might discover that the answers you have been waiting for have been quietly waiting inside you all along. By the end of this story, you will see that prayer is not about trying to reach a distant God. It is about realizing He has been closer than your own heartbeat the entire time. If you find this message inspiring, do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to stay connected. Together, let us rediscover the depth, peace, and power that come when we truly learn how to talk to God. When Jesus spoke about prayer, He did not begin with miracles or promises of blessings. He began with reverence. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Those words were not chosen by chance. They were the foundation of what prayer truly is: not a request, not a negotiation, but an encounter with holiness itself. Before any words of asking or seeking, Jesus taught that we must first recognize who we are standing before. Imagine walking into the presence of a great king. How carefully you would choose your words. How naturally your heart would bow before His majesty. And yet, even the greatest earthly king is nothing compared to the holiness of God. True prayer begins with that awareness, a quiet awe that fills the heart, a reverent stillness that silences every selfish thought. It is the moment when we realize that we are not the center of the conversation. In that space, words become less important than attitude. Humility replaces hurry, gratitude takes the place of complaint, and presence outweighs performance. To pray is to enter sacred ground, like Moses before the burning bush told him, "Remove your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." That is not just an ancient story. It is a symbol of what happens every time a sincere heart turns toward heaven. We take off the sandals of pride, ego, and distraction, and we step barefoot into divine presence. But humility in prayer is not about feeling small or unworthy. It is about seeing clearly, seeing God as holy and ourselves as deeply loved but human. Reverence is not fear that keeps us distant. It is love that draws us closer with respect. When Jesus prayed, He did so with a perfect balance of intimacy and awe. He called God Father. But He never forgot that this Father was the Creator of the universe. He approached with confidence but never with arrogance, with trust but never with entitlement. And that is what He wanted His followers to understand, that true prayer is built on relationship, not routine. In our modern lives, it is easy to lose that sense of sacredness. We rush through our prayers between emails and phone calls, offering hurried words without really entering into silence. We may speak, but we rarely listen. We ask, but we seldom adore. Yet prayer that begins without reverence often ends without peace. Because reverence opens the heart, it reminds us who we are and who God is. It reshapes our thoughts, aligning them with something far greater than our daily concerns. The moment we stop treating prayer like a transaction, it becomes a transformation. When Jesus said, "Hallowed be your name," he was not merely instructing us to say holy words. He was teaching us to become aware of the holiness surrounding us. Every breath, every sunrise, every heartbeat is a whisper of God's glory. When we see that, our prayers change. Instead of beginning with "I need," they begin with "Thank you." Instead of starting from emptiness, they start from fullness. Reverence reminds us that we are not speaking to a distant deity, but to the source of all life, and that realization alone can bring peace before a single request is made. To approach God with humility is not to grovel, but to come with honesty. Humility is the quiet strength that acknowledges we do not have all the answers, that our control is limited, and that there is wisdom beyond our understanding. It is the posture of the soul that allows faith to grow. A proud heart demands, a humble heart receives, and in that receiving, transformation happens. Some of the most powerful prayers are not loud or long. They are whispered in the stillness of the night, in the quiet tears of surrender, in the unspoken trust that God is listening even when we say nothing. The early Christians understood this. They prayed in secret, often in silence, not to impress others but to commune with the divine. They knew that reverence was not a performance. It was presence. Their prayers carried power not because of eloquence but because of sincerity. They approached God not with rehearsed speeches, but with hearts stripped of pretense. And in those moments, heaven seemed near, not because they shouted loud enough, but because they bowed low enough. To begin prayer with deep respect is to recognize that we are stepping into a mystery that cannot be fully understood, only experienced. It is the realization that the same God who created galaxies also listens to our quietest cries. That paradox humbles and comforts at the same time. It tells us that we matter, but also that the universe does not revolve around us. Reverence gives prayer its true rhythm, a heartbeat of humility, wonder, and trust. So before we speak our next prayer, we might pause for a moment of silence. We might breathe, feel the weight of the world slowly lift, and remember who we are addressing. In that silence, something sacred stirs, not outside, but within. Our hearts soften, our perspective widens. And suddenly, we are no longer reciting words, we are standing before the holy. And in that encounter, even before any answer comes, peace begins to unfold. When Jesus taught his followers to pray, he continued with words that reveal the deepest truth about prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. It is here that the entire meaning of prayer unfolds. It is not about bending God's will to fit our desires, but about bending our hearts to align with His. This is the turning point where prayer transforms from an act of asking into an act of surrender. And that surrender is not weakness. It is the highest form of trust a soul can give. We often come to God with a list, hopes, dreams, worries, and plans that we ask Him to bless. It is natural. It is. But in doing so, we can sometimes forget that prayer was never meant to be a way to control divine power. It was meant to be a way to open ourselves to it. The purpose of prayer is not to make God do what we want, but to draw us close enough that we begin to want what He wants. True prayer reshapes us. It softens our demands, purifies our intentions, and teaches us to see beyond our limited understanding. Think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before His suffering. In that moment of anguish, His prayer was raw and real. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet even as His humanity trembled, His spirit surrendered. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. That simple line contains the secret of divine peace. It shows that even the Son of God did not use prayer to escape pain but to embrace purpose. His surrender was not resignation but alignment, a conscious choice to trust the wisdom of the Father above his own fear. That same surrender is what gives meaning to our prayers today. When we stop insisting that life go our way, we make room for something greater to unfold. Often, what we call unanswered prayers are not denials. They are redirections. The doors that stay closed, the dreams that fade, the delays that frustrate us, they may all be part of a plan that protects us from what we cannot yet see. Faith is not proven when we receive what we asked for. It is proven when we keep trusting even when we do not. To surrender in prayer is to lay down the illusion of control. It means saying, "I do not understand this, but I trust you." It means being willing to wait, to listen, to let. It is easy to pray when the answers come quickly. It is harder when silence lingers. But in that silence, something sacred happens. Our restless thoughts begin to quiet. And slowly, our hearts start to beat in rhythm with something eternal. Surrender changes the posture of prayer from striving to stillness, from commanding to communing. When we pray for God's will to be done, we are not erasing our dreams or emotions. We are bringing them honestly before Him, and then releasing them into His hands. It is like a child placing a fragile gift into the care of a loving parent. The act itself becomes a declaration of trust. "I believe you know what to do with this better than I do." And somehow, even before anything changes, peace begins to flow, because surrender is not about giving up hope. It is about placing hope in the right hands. Throughout history, those who found the deepest intimacy with God were the ones who surrendered most completely. Abraham left his homeland without knowing where he was going, simply trusting the promise. Mary said, "Let it be to me according to your word," not knowing the cost her yes would bring. Each act of surrender opened the door for divine purpose to move through human lives. That is what "your will be done" truly means, allowing God's greater plan to unfold, even when it does not match our expectations. There is a quiet strength in this kind of faith. It does not demand signs or proof. It simply rests in the character of God. Surrender does not mean we stop asking or stop caring. It means that even as we ask, we release the outcome. We can still pour out our hearts, still express our desires, but with the understanding that every request is wrapped in the humility of, "If it is your will." This balance between desire and surrender is where real peace is found. Because when the heart learns to rest in God's will, it can no longer be shaken by circumstance. In that surrender, something profound happens within us. We begin to see life differently. Disappointments lose their bitterness, because we start to believe they might serve a greater purpose. Delays become opportunities for growth rather than punishment. Even pain becomes a place where God's presence can be felt more deeply. Surrender does not take away struggle, but it transforms how we carry it. It replaces anxiety with acceptance and resistance with rest. As the prayer continues on earth as it is in heaven, we are reminded that this alignment with divine will is not meant to stay within our private hearts. It is meant to shape how we live, how we forgive, how we act in the world. Each surrendered prayer plants a seed of heaven in earthly soil. It changes how we speak to others, how we face trials, how we see the people around us. When God's will becomes our own, love replaces fear, compassion overcomes judgment, and peace replaces striving. So when we kneel to pray, perhaps the most powerful words we can ever say are not the ones filled with requests, but the ones whispered in faith. "Your will be done." Those words are not the end of hope. They are its beginning. They open a path toward a deeper kind of freedom, the freedom that comes when we realize that God's plan, though mysterious, is always wiser, kinder, and more complete than anything we could design ourselves. And in that sacred surrender, we find not loss, but life, not defeat, but the quiet victory of trust. After surrender comes trust, a quiet, steady faith that God will provide what we truly need. Not always what we think we want, When Jesus said, "Give us this day our daily bread," he was teaching more than a request for food. He was speaking of a posture of the heart, one that depends on God each day, without fear of tomorrow. In a world that teaches us to chase security, to store up, to control every outcome, these words call us back to simplicity. They remind us that faith is not about having everything, but about knowing we are never without what truly matters. Imagine the Israelites wandering through the desert, gathering manna each morning. They were told not to hoard it, not to save it for tomorrow, because God wanted them to learn to trust His provision day by day. When they tried to store it, the manna spoiled, but every dawn, fresh bread appeared again, enough for that day. That story is not just history. It is a picture of how divine care works. We are invited to wake each morning and trust that what we need, strength, wisdom, peace, will be given, one day at a time. Yet this kind of trust is difficult. We live in constant motion, measuring our worth by what we have, our safety by what we can control. The idea of daily dependence feels uncomfortable, but true prayer is an antidote to that anxiety. It teaches us to rest in God's rhythm, to stop worrying about what is next and focus on what is now. When we ask for daily bread, we are really saying, "Teach me to live in the present moment. Help me to find contentment here." It is a request for peace, not abundance. It is the recognition that we are sustained by grace, not by our own striving. And yet, the prayer does not end there. Right after trusting for daily provision, Jesus adds, "Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors." It is as if He is saying, you cannot receive freely from God while holding others captive in your heart. The same hands that reach out to receive daily bread must also open to release resentment. Forgiveness, like manna, must be renewed every day. Yesterday's grace is not enough for today's wounds. To forgive is one of the hardest acts of faith. It feels easier to cling to hurt, to replay the injustice, to wait for an apology that may never come. But prayer that stops at provision and refuses forgiveness remains incomplete. Jesus placed these two petitions side by side because they are connected. Both are about dependence on grace. When we forgive, we acknowledge that we, too, live by mercy. We realize that none of us stands blameless. All of us need compassion. In forgiving others, we make room for divine grace to flow through us instead of stopping with us. There is a story told of a monk who spent years praying for enlightenment. One day, a traveler came to his monastery, angry and bitter from betrayal. The monk offered food and shelter, but the man refused kindness, cursing his fate. The monk simply said, "You cannot drink fresh water while holding poison in your mouth." The traveler wept, for he finally understood forgiveness was not about the other person. It was about freeing himself to live again. That is the truth of prayer as well. When we let go of bitterness, our hearts become light enough to hear God's whisper again. Trust and forgiveness are two sides of the same coin. Trust teaches us to let go of fear about the future. Forgiveness teaches us to release the pain of the past. Together, they make space for the present moment, the only place where God truly meets us. Every prayer that begins with reverence and surrender finds its fulfillment here. In the daily practice of faith and mercy, the one who trusts learns to live without anxiety. The one who forgives learns to love without condition. And between those two acts, the heart discovers peace that no circumstance can take away. To trust God for daily needs does not mean living carelessly or ignoring responsibility. It means holding everything with open hands. It means working, planning, giving, but never allowing fear to dictate the soul. It means recognizing that provision comes not only in the form of material things, but also through strength, courage, and opportunities we could never have created ourselves. Every time we pause to thank God for what we already have, we build the faith to trust Him for what is yet to come. Gratitude becomes the quiet proof of trust. and forgiveness, too, becomes a kind of daily bread. There will always be new moments to forgive small irritations, disappointments, or deep wounds that resurface. Each act of forgiveness feeds the spirit, the way bread nourishes the body. It restores relationship, lightens burdens, and reminds us that grace is never meant to be hoarded. When we forgive, we mirror the very nature of the one to whom we pray, generous, patient, and endlessly compassionate. Sometimes, people think that forgiving means forgetting or excusing the wrong. But forgiveness is not about erasing history. It is about refusing to let it define our future. It is choosing freedom over bitterness. Just as daily bread keeps the body alive, daily forgiveness keeps the soul alive. Without it, prayer becomes empty words, and the heart grows hard. When we whisper, "Give us this day our daily bread," we are really asking for more than sustenance. We are asking for a heart that trusts enough to rest, a spirit humble enough to forgive, and a faith strong enough to believe that each day's grace is enough. We are reminded that we are not self-made. We are sustained, and in that realization, something beautiful happens. Worry turns into worship, and resentment turns into release. True prayer, then, is not a transaction but a relationship. It breathes trust in the morning and exhales forgiveness at night. It depends on grace like the lungs depend on air. And when practiced this way, prayer stops being a request for control and becomes a rhythm of surrender, a heartbeat that echoes through every moment. Today is enough. Your grace is enough. Will trust, and I will forgive. There is a quiet truth about prayer that many forget, that it is not meant to be a performance, but a confession of the heart. When Jesus taught his followers to pray, he said, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." It was a plea for strength, not a ritual of words. Temptation does not always come in grand or visible forms. It often comes in silence, in the subtle pull of pride, in the moments when we long to appear righteous rather than to be real. That is why Jesus warned against praying for show, standing in public places, repeating rehearsed phrases, trying to look holy before others. True prayer is born in honesty, in the sacred privacy where there is no audience but God. Temptation begins not only with desire but with pretense. It whispers that we can control appearances, that we can live by image rather than truth. It tempts us to hide behind words instead of confronting what lives within. That is why genuine prayer must come from honesty. It is the only way to disarm temptation before it takes root. When we come to God pretending to be fine, we close the door to healing. But when we come trembling, uncertain, even ashamed, we open a space for grace to enter. Prayer is not about bringing our best selves to God. It is about bringing our real selves. Every person who has truly prayed knows this struggle, the tug between pride and surrender, between the desire to appear faithful and the courage to be honest. The heart longs to be seen, yet fears exposure. But it is only in that exposure that transformation begins. When Jesus prayed alone in the wilderness, tempted by hunger, fear, and power, he did not perform strength. He faced weakness and met it with faith. His prayers were not declarations of pride, but whispers of dependence. It is written, those words were his weapon, but his humility was his shield. We all face our own wilderness. Sometimes it comes as doubt, sometimes as anger, sometimes as exhaustion. Prayer becomes real when we dare to bring these things into it, when we stop editing our words for heaven's approval. God does not need our performance. He desires our truth. He already knows the battles we fight within, the fears we hide, the envy we deny, the mistakes we can undo. Honest prayer is not about explaining those things. It is about laying them bare, trusting that the one who sees will not condemn but restore. There was once a man who went to the temple and stood tall, listing all his good deeds aloud for others to hear. Nearby, A tax collector could barely lift his head. He struck his chest and whispered, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Jesus said it was the second man, not the first, whose prayer reached heaven. Because the first prayed to himself, while the second prayed to God. The difference was not in the words, but in the heart. Humility opened the door that pride had closed. When we pray with sincerity, we also pray for strength, because honesty itself requires courage. It is easier to recite beautiful phrases than to admit that we are lost, tempted, or tired. But only truth can call down help. "Lead us not into temptation" is more than a request for protection. It is an acknowledgement that we are vulnerable, that our hearts can drift if not anchored in grace. It is the confession that we need guidance, daily and deeply. And in that confession, power is found, not the power to avoid all trials, but the power to endure them without losing integrity. Temptation often disguises itself as comfort or pride. It tells us that we are strong enough on our own, that we do not need prayer, that we do not need forgiveness. But the more we believe that, the further we drift from truth. Honest prayer is the rope that pulls us back, not to a place of shame, but to clarity. It reminds us that weakness is not failure, that asking for help is not defeat. Every time we whisper, "Deliver us from evil," we are admitting our limits and affirming God's strength. That kind of humility builds the resilience that no temptation can destroy. True prayer is also quiet. It does not shout for attention or measure its worth by the reactions of others. The holiest prayers are often spoken in whispers, in the stillness of dawn, in the privacy of tears, in the quiet moments before sleep. They are the kind of prayers that leave no mark on the outside world, yet reshape everything within. These are the prayers that hold honesty and strength together, the courage to face our temptations, the wisdom to seek help, and the trust to believe that even when we stumble, grace still reaches out. In that secret space of prayer, where no one is watching, we find the kind of truth that sets the heart free. It is there that temptation loses its power, not because we have conquered it, but because we have surrendered it. We stop hiding our darkness and instead hand it to the light. We stop striving to look holy and instead learn to be whole. This is why Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray, not to escape the world, but to stay real in it. Solitude became his sanctuary, not his stay. Prayer that is honest is prayer that heals, changes how we see ourselves and others. When we stop performing before God, we stop judging those who struggle differently than we do. We learn compassion because we finally understand grace. Every temptation resisted, every truth spoken, every tear shed in the presence of God becomes part of a quiet redemption. When we pray for strength against temptation, what we are really asking for is integrity, the courage to remain true, even when it costs us comfort or pride, and when we choose honesty over appearance. Prayer becomes what it was always meant to be, a meeting between truth and love. In that meeting, pretense fades, temptation weakens, and the soul stands unafraid. It no longer needs to hide behind ritual or reputation. It rests in authenticity, knowing that God values sincerity more than perfection, and that the simplest, truest prayer, "Help me stay faithful," is often the one that moves heaven most. Powerful prayer is not born from perfect words or unbroken strength, but from faith that endures when there are no answers, from gratitude that whispers thank you even when the outcome is unclear, and from trust that believes God is working even in the silence. There is a deep beauty in that kind of faith, the kind that does not demand proof or immediate relief, but waits with open hands. It is not easy. Silence can feel like absence, and waiting can feel like being forgotten. But time and again, those who have walked closest with God testify that silence is not abandonment, it is preparation. When prayers seem unanswered, it is not that heaven has turned away. Often it is that heaven is still shaping the answer. Faith that trusts in God's timing understands that waiting is not wasted, The seed must stay in the dark before it breaks open and grows. The dawn must come through the night. In the same way, prayer works in unseen ways, changing not only circumstances but also the heart that prays. Sometimes the purpose of prayer is not to change what happens around us, but to change what happens within us to teach us patience, resilience, humility, and hope that is stronger than despair. Those who have learned to pray with gratitude know this secret well. Gratitude transforms prayer from a list of requests into a song of relationship. It reminds us that every breath, every sunrise, every act of kindness is already an answer to prayer. When we thank God even before the blessing arrives, we shift our focus from what we lack to what we have been given. Gratitude opens our eyes to the quiet miracles we often overlook: the friend who listens, the stranger who smiles, the strength to face another day. It is in those moments that we realize prayer is not about getting everything we want, but about recognizing how deeply we are already loved. Trust in God's timing, however, is perhaps the hardest part of all. We live in a world that moves fast, that measures success by speed and visibility. But the divine clock moves differently. It follows a rhythm that aligns not with our impatience but with our growth. There are times when God's silence is a shelter protecting us from what we are not yet ready for, or guiding us towards something greater than what we imagined. There are prayers that seem unanswered because the answer is still being written, one chapter at a time. And when the waiting stretches too long, faith becomes the bridge between the unseen and the promised. Think of the countless stories of faith across generations of those who waited for healing, for justice, for peace, and found that the waiting itself became the place where they met God most deeply. Their prayers did not fade in the silence. They matured there. They learned that prayer is not about controlling outcomes, but about remaining connected to the one who holds all outcomes in his hands. Even when the delay felt unbearable, they discovered that God's not yet was still an act of love. For what grows slowly grows strong. This is what makes prayer powerful: not volume, not length, not eloquence, but surrender. The quiet trust that says, even if I do not see it, I believe you are at work. The gratitude that says, even if I do not understand, I thank you. The faith that says, even if I must wait, I will still pray. These are the prayers that move mountains. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the heart behind them. They are prayers that do not collapse under silence, because silence cannot drown out faith. When we learn to pray this way, our lives begin to change in ways that no immediate answer could achieve. We stop measuring prayer by what we receive and start recognizing its power by how it transforms us. We find peace not in the end of our struggles, but in the presence that walks with us through them. We begin to see that every delay can carry divine purpose, that every closed door can be redirection, not rejection. Prayer becomes no longer an act of reaching out in desperation, but an act of resting in trust. And when the answer finally comes, whether through joy or through quiet acceptance, we see that the waiting was not empty. It was filled with unseen grace, shaping us for the moment we would finally understand. That is why gratitude is the soul of powerful prayer. It keeps our hearts open during the silence and teaches us to celebrate even the smallest light in the darkness. So if you are praying and still waiting, do not lose heart. Your faith is not wasted. Your words are not forgotten, and your silence is not ignored. Keep praying with sincerity. Keep trusting in God's timing, and keep being thankful for what you already have. For every moment you choose faith over fear, gratitude over complaint, and trust over doubt, you draw closer to the very heart of prayer itself. Thank you for listening and for walking with us through this reflection on the power of prayer. If this message has touched your heart or reminded you to keep believing even in silence, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith and inspiration. Your support helps us continue spreading light and hope to hearts around the world. Stay faithful. Stay grateful. And remember, even in the quiet, God is still listening.